Welcome to the Sharkpreneur Podcast. This is your co-host, Seth Greene. Today, I have the good fortune to be joined by someone who is entering a rarefied number, a very small number of guests who've been asked to come back to the Sharkpreneur twice. That is none other than David Wood. David Wood, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We're happy to have you back. So, where we last left off, you had built the number one life coaching business basically in the world, and then had moved on from that. And now you are coaching around individually, companies, teams, CEOs on the tough conversations. Talk a little bit about what your latest transition.
Yeah. I started years ago, like back in 1997, I started having tough conversations because I did a personal growth program and they were really big on cleaning up the past. So I'd have to I'd do conversations you might not believe. I had to write down anyone I was upset with, anyone I resented, anyone I felt guilty about hurting. And they wanted me to call bullies from high school or the girl who broke my heart twice at age 15. And I said, no, I'm not having that conversation. And, it took a lot of coaching, but eventually I managed to find my courage and I went and took a risk. And I went and spoke to people I would have thought I could never speak to. And I would have those tough conversations with them. And I got to feel better about myself. I got to be more connected with them. I felt transformed. And then sometimes when you do it in the work environment or for your business, you get amazing results. Like tough conversations are where amazing results live. And I grew up a chicken because I wasn't taught to go and have tough conversations. I grew up in an Australian town. You sweep stuff under the carpet. You don't talk about it. But I'm here now as an evangelist to say, if you're willing to lean in and be uncomfortable and take a risk and be vulnerable, you can have amazing results for yourself and for your business and family.
Wow. So you are absolutely right. I have had a few of those just popped into my mind right now on the personal side. So
you want to give an example? I mean, let's make this real. I'm curious.
Sure. All right. So we're putting me on the couch. Okay, sure. So I'll give you one I had a number of years ago, but within the last 5 years, maybe. So I only knew, on my mother's side of the family, I only knew my step-grandfather. He married my grandmother before I was born, and he was grandpa to me my entire life. And neither my mother nor my grandmother talked about my biological grandfather or my mother's biological father. And did some digging, asked some questions. My mother had a sob story about how whatever her mother had told her about who this guy was, and whatever relationship they didn't have and whatever the reasons were for that. And of course it was all his fault. And do you know anything about him? Have you heard? Does he know why you had kids? Does he know I exist? Like, does he know my brother exists? Any of this stuff? I decided, kind of at the inspiration of my wife, because I heard he was getting on in years, and I found a phone number, did some digging, picked up the phone, and got his fifth wife on the phone. Apparently he had remarried quite a few times, and explained who I was and could hear her shock. But she had apparently been told that I existed and who I was. And then she got him on the phone, and I had to repeat myself a couple times, older, hard of hearing. And finally I get through to him. I'm your long lost grandson from, your estranged daughter, who you haven't spoken to in more than like 30 years. He started crying. I started crying. It became a very emotional conversation. He said, oh my God, you've added 10 years to my life. I've always wanted to know, always wanted to reach out, but I was told not to. He told a slightly different story than my mother and my grandmother had told me.
Right.
And then, you know what, this was probably 11 years ago, because for my son's first birthday, who's now 12, he wasn't old enough to remember it, but my wife and I took him to Disney. And we stopped by and met in person my long lost grandfather. He got to meet my wife. He got to meet his great grandson.
Wow.
We met his fifth wife, and very emotional, releasing visit of releasing tension. Wasn't even aware, that I had around this topic. I had just assumed, like it said, accepted. That's just the way it is. That's
Right.
the story I've heard. It must be true. We just don't talk to him, don't know anything about him, any of this. And my wife said, she was the inspiration going when we were dating and getting married and learning about each other and our histories. And she said, "Are you sure that's true? Do you really know? Or could there be another side of that story?" I said,
Yeah.
"I don't know." So
Well,
that's when I started
firstly-
asking my mother questions.
Well, firstly, I want to acknowledge your courage, because I imagine that'd be a terrifying call to make.
It was less okay, so I was a little bit nervous.
Okay.
Because I didn't, other than hey, is he the negative person they've made him out to be, and is he going to reject this phone call, or are we going to have some type of productive conversation, was probably the only thing I worried about. Now, when you were mentioning how you were forced to go call bullies from high school, the bully who tormented me in middle school for years immediately popped into my head. I have found him since on Facebook, and will occasionally look at his newsfeed, but have not reached out, have not made a phone call, have harbored a lifelong fantasy of getting revenge.
Yes. Yes.
And the interesting thing is, we had a client who wrote a book on bullying. And in the research for that book that we did for him, I learned a ton about, oh my God, nobody bullies for no reason. What must his home life have been like if he
Right.
thought that was okay to express his anger that way? So I've let some of it go in terms of some empathy, in terms of he was probably hurting more than you were if he felt the need to do that.
Wow.
But still have the fantasy of, now that I am an adult and able and a black belt martial artist and able to defend myself, going to his city in another state, sneaking up on him, tapping him on the shoulder when he turns around, punching him in the face.
Yes. Well, that's a valid approach too.
I'm probably not going to do that one, because I have some licenses from different industries that if I didn't have like a ski mask on and didn't escape unknown, I could lose for being in a legal proceeding. So It's not worth the risk to me.
Well, I want to emphasize a couple of points that I think could be highlighted here. One is, you talked about with the bully and with your grandfather that there could be another side to the story. Now, we tend to live in our own world. So when I'm having a tough conversation, I think I know how it is. And it's tough in my world. I'm not usually open to the other person might have a totally different story. Like that bully might have had a horrible home life, or my grandfather might have been told not to reach out to me, and he thinks he's doing the right thing. So that's one of the beautiful things that can come out of a tough conversation, is you can get connected and understand each other's worlds. The other thing that I got from hearing your story is, the reason we avoid a tough conversation is because our mind presents us with the risks. Mind's good at that. So the mind might say, I'm not calling my grandfather. He might tell me to bugger off. I might find out he's not interested, so I'm not going to feel very worthy, right? Those risks are quite apparent. I'm going to feel awkward. I'm not going to know what to say. The mind will tell you all of that. What the mind often won't tell you is the potential upside. The mind often won't present to you, you might be able to release a bunch of tension you didn't even know you had. You might get really connected. You might make a difference to someone else's life. You might feel more expressed and more powerful in your life. There's so much that comes out of it. And my job is to, I think, help open eyes a little more so that you can weigh up the risks that you're already clear about with the gain that you may not be clear about, and you can make a decision. Does it look like there's a profit in this tough conversation? In my experience, 9 times out of 10, there's a profit, and it's worth the risk for the potential gain. Every now and then, no. I won't have that conversation. It doesn't look like it's actually going to be profitable, but we're sweeping too many under the carpet, and it's time to bring them back out and screw up a little bit of courage so we can have the wonderful gains.